Hello, hi everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. So glad to see so much interest in this event tonight. Thank you for choosing to spend your Thursday evening with us. We much appreciate it. I'm really looking forward to tonight's event, and I hope you're all going to enjoy yourselves. Just to let everyone know, for this event tonight, we have enabled closed captioning for the lecture. So if you would like to read the captions, just click the button at the bottom of your screen that says CC. It's beside the Q&A button at the right-hand side. So if you click the option to turn on captions there, the transcripts will appear on the right-hand side of the screen. So I just want to say a note on the captioning as well. This lecture will be all in English, but we do use some Ukrainian words. So unfortunately, the captioning software from Zoom doesn't pick up on Ukrainian words. So I do apologize in advance if that causes any confusion, or sometimes the words it selects can be kind of funny. So just bear with us on that. So I think we've got a good amount of people tuned in, so I'm going to get started. I am very happy to welcome everyone to tonight's event, Grandmother's Beads, Heirloom Preservation and the Importance of Stories with Anastasia Baczynskyj. And this is the last event of our exhibit, The Spirit of Beads, Sharing Our Stories. I'd like to start just by introducing myself. My name is Lily Stafford, and I'm the curator of the Ukrainian Museum of Canada, Ontario branch's recent exhibit, The Spirit of Beads, Sharing Our Stories. So this exhibit is presented in partnership with the Native Canadian Centre of Toronto, and it celebrates the beauty of Ukrainian and Indigenous beadwork. The Spirit of Beads, Sharing Our Stories unpacks the symbolism and spiritual, political, and cultural significance of beadwork for many diverse groups of Ukrainians and Indigenous peoples. So this exhibit was the museum's first venture in collaboration outside of the Ukrainian community, and it has been met with great success. Tonight is actually our final event before this exhibit closes this Saturday. So before we begin tonight's lecture, I would like to start with a land acknowledgement. Please keep in mind that this acknowledgement is for the land that we now know as Toronto. So for those joining us from outside of Toronto, I encourage you to research the history of the land which you call home and identify which treaties cover it. It is important to give a land acknowledgement because it gives an opportunity to pause and be present, reflect, and think about our place here, these lands, and how colonization and the oppression of Indigenous peoples has privileged some over others. By doing a land acknowledgement, we acknowledge respect and recognition of Indigenous peoples, practices, and ways of knowing. So we acknowledge that the land we are meeting on is the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples, and is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples. We also acknowledge that Toronto is covered by Treaty 13 with the Mississaugas of the Credit. Thank you. I'm very delighted to introduce our speaker for this evening, Anastasia Baczynskyj. So Anastasia holds a master's degree from the Ontario Institute of Studies in Education at the University of Toronto and has been teaching professionally for over 15 years. A specialist in identity formation, she has a keen interest in elements of material culture and their importance in developing a cultural identity. Her passion for beads has allowed her to develop a deep understanding of Ukrainian beadwork, including materials, techniques, and regional styles. Her love for the art form began in childhood, and her passion has recently taken a new direction. Ukrainian women from all over the globe now turn to her to help restore heirlooms or craft new pieces from remnants of family treasures. She has led restorative work through online live sessions when sending the item was not possible. We are really honored to have Anastasia here to share her knowledge with us this evening. And without further ado, I will turn over to Anastasia. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lily. Thank you. Welcome, everyone. Thank you, everyone, for coming. I am thrilled that we have so many enthusiasts about culture and heritage and beadwork. I'm going to actually start my share my screen. If I can do that, actually, I am Lily. Can you help me out, because it seems like I cannot at this point. Is it possible to share my screen?
Go ahead now.
Thank you. And we're going to start from the beginning. So as Lily mentioned, this lecture is called, or this talk is called Grandmother's Beads and the Importance of Stories in the Preservation of Heirlooms. And I would like to echo Lily in the acknowledgement of the land that we are in. I am also in the territory that is traditional territory of the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Wendat, the Mississauga, the Credit, and the Haudenosaunee, known as Toronto. But to many of you may think that Toronto means meeting place in Huron, and I suggest that we all take a look at that once more, because as Lily said, it's important to know what happened before you, and to be perfectly honest, that's not exactly true. So if it's something that interests you, I suggest that you go and take a look into deeper understanding of where your territory is. And in the case of Toronto, we may have some misunderstandings about even our name. So and if we look at things that are going before us, this is kind of exactly what we're talking about right now, is about heirlooms and about preserving stories from one generation to the next. Now, I don't know who's on the call today because I can't see everyone, but I'm going to just introduce what I learned in school, what my specialty is, to place myself. And I got my master's at OISE at U of T, and I studied something called historiography, which is a fancy, fancy, dancy word that means it's the study of how history is written for a particular aim of a group. So it's how we cultivate historical narratives, how we cultivate our histories, our stories, to present a certain image of ourselves. Now, my thesis was called Learning How to Be Ukrainian Schools in Toronto and the Formation of Identity. And I studied how the generational transmission between one generation to the next of Ukrainian identity, and how that is cultivated through the medium of Ukrainian schooling in the city of Toronto. But in the basis, it's actually about knowledge transfer. It's about how we transfer knowledge from one generation into the next. And I was very lucky in my master's career because I had to take a TA-ship. And the TA-ship that I selected with to work with Linda Muzzin, who was focused on Indigenous postgraduate and professorship rates in Canadian universities. And the question she was studying is researching barriers of access, because there was a disproportionately low number of professors and postgraduate students in the Indigenous communities, from Indigenous communities. And we were trying to find out exactly what they were. And although we found many physical barriers, of course, there's lots of physical barriers, one of the things that was shared with us that were overarching themes about knowledge transfer, and how the traditional knowledge transfer in Indigenous communities have thematica that overarch over many communities, and it didn't jive with Western academia. It didn't jive at all with Western academia and the philosophies behind Western academia. And why I'm mentioning this today is because elements of this philosophy are actually very important for our discussion today, because we're talking about generational transfer, knowledge transfer, and some of the things that were shared with us actually make complete sense for our conversation today. So I'm going to share what was shared with us many moons ago. I'm not going to tell you when I finished my master's, but many moons ago. And so what was shared with us was that in many Indigenous communities, that the knowledge keepers understand themselves as vessels that are not permanent vessels. They are transitional vessels. So knowledge keepers know that they must transfer the knowledge that they have to the next generation. It's actually a call of duty. They sense it as a call of duty. It is not something that they hoard, and it's like, well, I got this info and I'm not going to share it. It's like they know once they've received that information that they must share it. They have the duty to. And so what that means is that sometimes that means they have to go and actively select the next knowledge keeper, right? So sometimes the knowledge is you can share the knowledge widely, but sometimes the knowledge is special, that they need a special person to be able to house that knowledge and appropriately apply it. So they will go out and actively seek the next knowledge keeper, right? And they will say that this person has the aptitude, the talents, the proper character to be able to house this information and use it for the benefit of the community around them after the first knowledge keeper is gone. So on that thematica, we also look at the fact that once the knowledge is passed to the the next knowledge keeper is not for that person's benefit, right? It's not like, hey, Joe, I like you. I've got some info that you'll really, really find it's going to make you a superstar. It's for your individual use. You go and, take this and run with it. It's actually, well, no, hey, Joe, I'm giving this info because I know that you will do good with to the community with it. And it's not for the benefit of Joe. It's for the benefit of the entire community. So there's no individualism in the knowledge. It's kind of just you're a vessel, you're a keeper, but not, doesn't make you necessarily, it makes you respected, but it's not respect for respect's sake. And because knowledge transcends time and space, so knowledge as a concept, right, is gathered by the many, many generations that come before, and it's gathered and it's passed on for the benefit of future generations. It transcends time and space. It raises from the physical plane into the spiritual plane. It exists above the physical. And so it's sacred. It exists in the spiritual plane, which means that if it's sacred, it cannot be commodified, right? Knowledge is sacred. It cannot be commodified. It is so valuable. It is so valuable because it benefits people that it cannot be commodified. It's an anathema to commodify knowledge because it's for the benefit of the community. So why would you commodify it? That's actually not correct to do so. And so it cannot be priced. It's so valuable that it is priceless. And so looking at these 5 concepts, we can kind of see how these knowledge transfer philosophies are important when we look at our own knowledge transfer, because they actually apply quite almost one-to-one when we look at heritage and heirlooms specifically within passing on heritage. So I just want to manage some expectations, because I think that some people might be expecting that we're going to be talking about physical preservation and talking about physical preservation of string integrity and which findings are correct for certain beadwork and things like that. And we are here to talk about the preservation of heirlooms. We are, absolutely. But when we talk about the preservation of heirlooms, we're talking more than just the physical piece. Physical preservation of an object will absolutely not guarantee heirloom status. In no way, shape, or form. You can restore a piece, you can make it perfect, you can restring everything, make everything absolutely perfect, and it will be perfectly donatable to Goodwill, right? How many times have you gone into Goodwill and go, who would give that away? Right? And it's true. And I'm sure we've all done it, or we've gone into, a secondhand store and who would give this away? Right? So physical preservation of an object does not guarantee heirloom status. And we're going to talk about how to preserve heirloom status. So to manage expectations, what we're going to be talking about today and kind of give you a landscape of what we're going to be talking about today is that we're going to, with the frame of reference of your collection in your mind or in the back of your mind, we're hopefully going to be talking about how to expand your mind into looking at objects as potential heirlooms, right? We want everybody to kind of have the framework in mind to be like, well, that actually might even be an heirloom, right? Start to think about your objects in your possession that actually might have potential, right? And then looking at heirloom status and how to preserve the heirloom status. Because once you preserve heirloom status, you can transfer heritage. You can actually do the act of heritage. And we're going to talk about the act of heritage, ensuring the longevity and vitality of culture, right? So there's a process by which that has to happen, and we'll talk about it. And then hopefully at the end, or my intent is at the end of the lecture, or at the end of the talk, that you will look at heirlooms not as objects and not as something valuable to pass on, but actually as a vessel for knowledge, a vessel or a catalyst to tell a story. Because that's what's important about the piece. It's the piece itself is not as important as the story, because as we will see, the story is what imbues it with knowledge, it imbues it with spirit. And that's why this particular exhibit is so brilliantly named, and we'll round out on why this is such a brilliantly named exhibit. And it'll be very clear at the end of the discussion. Physical preservation, I know that many people are actually wanting to talk about physical preservation, and there is no harm in that. We want to talk about physical preservation as well, because as well as heirloom status, we want to make sure that there's something to pass on. But so before we get to the stage of preservation, this talk will also supply prep work and aids so that you can prepare your collection for becoming an heirloom. And that's actually just as important. So when you start into physical preservation, that you actually have your collection organized and that you have a sense of what is what, and that basically you will understand what is what, and you might have a pile that you might be questioning about. And so that's actually prep work that has to happen even before you go into preservation, right? Because it'll help date pieces, it'll help do a lot of things that you'll need to conserve it physically. Plus, in this online environment, it's really hard. Like if I were to show you this piece and this piece, could you tell the difference? No, it's really hard to do that online. This is 100 years old. This is 2 days ago, right? So you would never be able to tell, right, online. So some things you need to see in person. And so there is something in the works where after this presentation, or after this talk, there is a potential to actually coming into the museum and show our treasures and actually bring in our stuff after we've organized it, so that we can get more out of that particular experience. So I don't know when that will be, but there is something in the works, and I know that the museum is open to that idea, to have a show and tell and kind of talk about preservation in a more aware way. And hopefully that will happen soon. I'm not quite sure when that will happen, but I know that that is something that is in the works. So don't worry about physical preservation just yet. Worry about heirloom status, and then we can start talking next time about physical preservation, like thread integrity and all sorts of stuff. So that's that will be for next time, and that's exciting because I like that stuff too. So let's talk about what kind of things can be. Oh, I missed a one. So what is an heirloom in general, right? I think that most of us understand that a valuable object, right, that has belonged to a family for several generations, and that's what comes up when you define heirloom. Now, I agree with this statement, in principle. However, there is one caveat, and I think that for several generations is the caveat. I think that an heirloom must pass from at least one generation to the next, but it doesn't have to be for several from behind, right? You can be the first generation to pass something down, and that's okay. So in principle, I understand that this is, this statement is almost true. It's several generations, however, can be with a caveat saying that it has passed from at least one generation into the next, and then hopefully for several generations into perpetuity. So what things can be heirlooms, right? Pretty much anything of value. If it's valuable, then it can be an heirloom. Furniture, clothes, documents, weapons, ceramics. But what do humans love to pass down from one generation to the next? It's jewelry. Humans love jewelry. It doesn't matter what culture you're from. Humans love jewelry. And it's something that happens from every culture. It can be of any kind of material from one to the next, but not every culture values furniture or documents, right? But almost all cultures value jewelry. And the oldest form of jewelry, the grand ancestor of all jewelry, is beads, right? From Homo sapiens sapien, the oldest grave goods that we find with our species are beads. Now, beads is a catchword for culture, and it is some of the oldest grave goods we have. And the fact that what beads represents is the fact that we are going from instinctive living to eat, sleep, make love, make babies, not make love, make babies, and do what you need to do, to, oh, I look good in this. Right? So it's a completely different understanding. There's a shift in our minds when we start wearing jewelry, right? And so beads are the grand ancestor of all jewelry. So we think they have value. We find them valuable, right? And I want to explore the term value. Now, we all understand conceptually that value does not equal money. We are conceptually geared to understand that, but we are actually geared to equate value and money. So when we're talking about heirlooms, we think that it must be monetarily worth something. It has to be coral or, balamute, or something that is of extreme value, of material value, to consider it an heirloom. Now, conceptually, we say, actually, no, we can do things that are not necessarily that. But really, when you think of value, a lot of us are geared towards a monetary thing. But, and I feel like Tony Robbins or like, Bob Proctor saying things that you already know, right? But do we actually do it like on a day-to-day basis? And we're going to illustrate that, right? So we know that beads can have value, right? They can be made out of amber, pearls, precious stones, gold, silver, coral, decorative glass. These things have value, market value, right? But value is so weird because market value is a great way to look at what people value things at. Because if you look at this, value is about emotional connection, right? Talk about emotional markets, right? Because people will buy a stock or drop a stock depending what they feel about it, right? And so if we look at a chewed piece of gum, you think it's worth $0, right? It's not worth anything. There's no market value for chewed gum. Oh, really? I want, just in your mind, take a guess how much this right piece of gum. So that's my gum that you're looking at the left. I chewed some gum, spat it out, put it on the market. People are like, yeah, right. $0. Thank you very much. Right. But if you are the manager of Manchester United and it's your last game managing Manchester United and you chewed gum and you put it on the market, you know what some person paid for it? I am not even kidding you. Some person spent $640,000 US on a piece of chewed gum. Like, there's no intrinsic value in the gum, but somebody had an emotional connection to Manchester United to the point where they're willing to spend this money. So absolutely, value is about emotional connection. Now, value can be priceless, right? Value can be something so valuable that it's priceless. So to illustrate this further, right? To illustrate this, how stories do end up becoming priceless and how they attach onto items. If you look at the necklace at the bottom, that's a coral necklace with gold. You can buy it. It's an Indian store. You can buy it online. It comes from India. It, around, $850 US, right? Plus taxes, duties, and all that fun stuff. And you look at the market value of the necklace above, and it's what? $2, maybe, right? However, what if I told you that a bead set like that, a wooden bead set like that, belonged to, a grandmother who was originally from Western Ukraine, who was stolen by the Nazis and was taken to Germany to work in a factory, didn't know she was going to survive from day to day, worked from dawn till night, not knowing where her family is, stolen. And this is the only thing that she was allowed to keep was this wooden necklace because it was of no value. And so she kept this as a memory of her home. And she got sent to a DP camp. And from there, she came to Canada. And it is the only thing that she has from her homeland. Of course, that necklace is worth no amount of money could you pay to value that necklace. That necklace is priceless. It is definitely an heirloom, even though it has absolutely no intrinsic market value. It is priceless, right? That's just to illustrate a point. So when we look at value, it's actually your stories that add the value. And we will see exactly how in a model, how things transcend from object to artifact to possession to heirloom only through stories. It's the only way that it will get heirloom status. And enough people creating heirlooms are what keep a culture alive. Or enough people telling stories and connecting things and telling them from generation to generation, or it's how a culture survives. Without that transfer, a culture will die. And so we have to take a look at our stories, and we have to understand that every single story that you have is important. And this is where heritage, the act of heritage, comes in, because we think that, you know, to pass something down, you can have to have like an heirloom to pass down. You can pass down stories, and the object itself is lovely, but the story is extremely important in the act of heritage, right? And we'll talk about the act of heritage in a second, but culture and heritage are different. You must do the act of heritage in order for the culture to survive. You are all knowledge keepers, all of you, okay? And I know that you might think that, well, I don't have a lot of stuff to pass down, because some of us don't have the physical to pass down, right? Some of our families, today is National Internment Day, recognition of internment today, where Ukrainian Canadians were locked up into internment camps and things were taken away from them, and they don't have anything to pass down because they were locked away. Both my grandfathers were stolen from Ukraine by the Nazis. It doesn't mean that you have nothing to pass down. You are a knowledge keeper. You have stories, and you can be the first one to pass something down. And it takes a lot of bravery. And this picture is my sister, myself, and my first cousin. None of our mothers sewed those shirts, but we wore their shirts every single year at Christmas time. And when we pass it down to our children, that will become an heirloom. And that's okay that it didn't exist, you know, in many, many generations before us, but we can be the first people to pass that down to the next generation and share the stories, all the stories that we had at Christmas time with that piece. So you must pass on the threads that you have, those stories. They might be filaments, they might be super thin, you might not know a lot, but you must start, you must be the weft, you must be the first pieces that tapestry, your family tapestry, will be woven on, because it will get richer through time, right? And the more families that do this, the more people that do this in their families, the bigger the culture will become, because the bigger the cloth will become, because all these people are weaving these stories together. And that every single person's contribution, every single filament in a tapestry is important. Okay, so it's important that we pass on these stories, even if you might not think that you have like lots of heirlooms behind you. You might have one, two, you actually might have more, okay? And your stories are actually just as important as your heirlooms. And why can't, yeah. So let's talk about heirloom creation and heritage transfer, okay? So heritage transfer, okay, we're talking the act of heritage, must occur many times over for the culture to be healthy. And the idea of health is to live a long time, right? So you want a culture to be healthy, you want it to live a long time, right? It needs health, it needs vitality. And so I actually looked at the holistic health model, which is very, very, very good as a basis model to understand how heirlooms and how heritage is passed on. So for those of you that don't know the holistic health model, it's separated into 4 different quadrants. You have your physical health, you have your mental health, you have your emotional health, and you have your spiritual health. And so these things are, you must have all these in balance for something to be, for you to be healthy. But if we look at how, you know, physical versus conceptual versus emotive versus transcendental, when you have these 4 quadrants focus on an object, you have some pretty interesting and accurate descriptions on how things work. So let's look at the physical first. First, you have an object, right? You have a physical object. Physical object. It's a physical object. When we conceptually look at this object, we can sometimes tell that it is representative of a certain culture, right? That's when it becomes an artifact, right? When it's representative of a certain culture, right? We can conceptualize that this is that's part of this particular, that looks Slavic, right? That looks like something that a Ukrainian person would wear. We can kind of conceptualize the fact that it might be an artifact, right? It represents a culture, right? But then it's also emotional because it belongs to somebody, right? It belongs to somebody. It's a possession. So emotional attachment is you have an emotional attachment to your possession, right? Now, when you look at the little arrow that's pointing over to the heirlooms section, that's when an object becomes an heirloom, is when it transcends. And how that works is that you look at the physical, you have coral beads, you have the artifact, which is the external community. You look at the emotional, which is the internal family culture, that's where this gets a story. So when the artifact, right, has no story, when an object has no story and it's representative of a culture, we can call it an artifact, okay? But when it becomes a possession and emotion, there's stories attached to it, there's emotions attached to it, it actually can transcend into the spiritual, and it reaches heirloom status when the story is repeated to the next generation. So that's the active heritage. It's the telling of the story that is what creates an heirloom, okay? And you knowledge transfer, you transfer knowledge, you've imbued the item with spirit, you've given it, it's an access point for knowledge, right? So it transcends time and space. It'll go from the past and it'll go to the future, and it'll go with its story. So that's an important thing. You transcend into the spiritual plane. And when we look at it again, let's look at it in a specific context. These are coral beads. As an artifact, coral beads are used in Slavic cultures to mark status and to possibly give protection. In the emotive sense, these are not this particular beads, but these were beads that were given to Baba in 1951 when she was married, right? And when you tell that story to your children or to somebody that's going to inherit the piece, you have created an heirloom. But without you telling that story, it can be demoted to artifact, right? Because it has no story, but you can kind of tell that it is a Slavic necklace, you can kind of tell. But if your next generation doesn't even recognize it as an artifact, it will be demoted to object. And that is when you see these pieces at Goodwill or at Tilly's or at Value Village, because they don't even recognize it as a cultural element. They don't recognize it as a family piece with no story. They don't recognize it as an artifact. They just recognize it as an object. Does that make sense? Right? So that's how things get demoted. But to promote them to heirloom status, you need to pass on that story, right? So the active heritage is when you transfer knowledge. So you look at culture, right? Culture is when you have traditions and external culture that are shared amongst the group. And that's also internalized with traditions that are repeated in the family, right? But the active heritage is when you pass that culture down into the next generation. And I wrote an article called The Active Heritage, and it's actually on the VSTI website. If you want to take a look, I can actually send that link as well, differentiating the difference between culture and heritage. And that heritage means hériter, to inherit. And so you must do that active process. You must be an active knowledge keeper. You must actively pass on that knowledge, because you're not giving your heritage. You're not giving your heritage at all. You're not creating heritage. You're just leaving the culture as is. And without that, the active movement, you're not going to solidify the culture. You're actually going to let it slip away. and for the detriment of everybody, right? So stories must be told. Artifacts tell a cultural story, possessions tell a personal story, and heirlooms will tell both, right? And that actually is for any piece. So like if you have a, Chippendale furniture, for example, that tells a cultural piece, right? That tells about culture, where you lived, what your ability to buy things, all that kind of stuff about your culture, the culture that you lived in. So even though we're talking about beads right now, this applies for almost every heirloom. Okay, you can inherit stocks, right? That's valuable, but there's no story, so that's not an heirloom, right? So they don't tell about culture at all, right? So this is all great. I'm sure many of you are like, that's great esoteric information, Anastasia. That's wonderful. We understand this. How do we do it, right? How do we actually make sure that we can transfer these stories and do it in a way that is a little bit organized and systematic, right? So I've prepared certain prompts and documents for you to help you. So we're going to go through this process right now, but you will have help. So it's not like, okay, go look in your collection, tell your stories. It's like, well, no, there's something we can do to help that process. So we're going to talk about that right now. And we're going to use this as, the beads in your collection. The beads in your collection can be, what we're talking about right now, but you can apply this to other pieces that you might feel are important enough to pass down. Right, so this is what it looks like. There's a description sheet. There's information on how to use the sheets that I will send you. So the idea is that we're going to be sending sheets out, and these sheets you'll print a couple of copies, right? You'll print some copies. This is what they look like. And what I suggest is that you lay what you consider your valuable bead collection out, right? And you print enough copies for each piece, right? And then you lay each piece that you have on the copy, right, on a table. Do this over a weekend because it's probably going to take a little time. You put on your table, you put your pieces on these items, on these papers, and then fill out as much information as you can about the piece, right? Try to put them in chronological order if you can, right? And then don't worry if you can't fill in all the information. That's okay. They're just prompts, right? And the pieces of paper will serve as kind of the catalog card, right? And you'll be encouraged to take a picture of each piece and glue it onto the sheet. It'll be your catalog piece. This is what you do in museums, all right? It'll be your cataloging piece. But on the back of the page, right? There's space for you to start writing about why this piece is important to you, why it's valuable, the stories that you have about wearing this piece, or even around the piece, or even just something that prompts you, why the piece prompts you to tell certain stories, and you can write them down. Now, a lot of people are saying, well, why can't I orally transfer them? And there's nothing wrong with orally transferring your stories. However, or why can't I record them? Right? Why can't I record them on an audio recorder? You can do that, but I just want to give fair warning. The last time you listen to a tape deck, right? Digital archiving is a very thick thicket, and there's issues of updating digital files and things like that. So good old paper has lasted for a really long time, and it still does. So I think the last time you listened to a tape deck was maybe 20 years ago, if not more. And the last time you read something on a piece of paper was today, right? So paper has staying power. And in case that the person forgets the story, there's a backup, right? So that's why you have, the piece of paper. And once you've done that and you've been able to take a picture and put a picture of the piece, right, on your catalog thing, you can actually put those catalog files, or these little sheets, into a binder. You can keep them with your important papers. You can keep them as a record, right, of what you think is important. Now, you will have things that you will put aside that you don't think are valuable, right? You'll be like, well, that's actually kind of the caca pile. I don't think that's really anything that's important. These are my important stuff, right? hang on, right? When you put aside the pieces that you don't have any connection to, please make sure you double check before you discard or donate it or just get rid of it. Because, you can present both the collection that you know about and the collection of random box when you talk to an expert. Because when an expert can look at them and say, well, actually, you know this and this and this more about the stuff that you know, but then they might look at your random box and be like, why are you throwing out fantik beads, right? So what fantik beads are, so just so you know, fantik beads are literally garbage beads. Okay, what they are, if you look at the lady on the left, she is from southern Ukraine, and she has these beautiful metal bugle, long metal bugle beads around her neck at the bottom there, at the base of her neck. And metal elements are very sought after in Ukrainian necklaces. You have zgardy, they're very, very sought after. Metal bits flash, they're beautiful. They're considered protective, they're considered, status. But not every girl could afford a lot of metal for her necklaces. So sometime in the early 1900s, late 1800s, girls started to make their own metal beads by taking chocolate wrappers and wrapping them into beads, or cello paper and wrapping them into beads and wearing them around their neck, or making gorgeous vinke out of them. And so these are their cello paper, or their foil, right? So if you have something like that in your collection, you're like, this is not anything, but actually this is probably made by one of your, somebody's ancestor. It's handmade, and it's completely an artifact. And it's sad that it's not an heirloom because you don't have a story with it, but it's completely an artifact. And a lot of these necklaces didn't survive the test of time because people literally just threw them out, right? And when you look at other pieces, so this is a great example. This is actually in the museum. These pieces are in the museum. The left picture are shaliste. They are worn in the Carpathian Mountains. They're usually brass, and they're not made of any great material. They look like jingle bells, and they're usually strung on, maybe sometimes on metal, like on metal coil, or on, or on wool. They're just jingly bells, right? Like, so if you didn't know it, you'd be kind of like, well, this is Christmas decorations, right? Right? If you didn't know, because it'd be in your random pile, because it's not necessarily intrinsically very valuable. It's not amber, it's not coral, it's not, it's kind of just brass, right? So if you didn't know that those are shaliste, you'd be like, well, that's not really anything, right? The top piece is super fascinating because this is something that came to light at the museum. This is a cotillon. This is a special woven beaded ornament that women would give to their sweethearts when they were going away to war. And they would hold a watch, or they'd be like a pin, or they'd be kind of like a symbol of good luck and love from a sweetheart. And if you didn't know that, if you look on the right-hand side of that piece, if all those frenzli, if all those tassels were gone, you'd think it's just a ripped necklace, right? Or you'd think it's just kind of like it's just a piece that's broken. It's really not really anything. And you'd maybe get rid of it because it's not complete. It looks incomplete. It looks like it's just a piece of a necklace. But in essence, it's not. It's not even a necklace at all, right? It's a love token. And so when you look at that pile, you might find, people that know might find things in there that you had no idea were artifacts that tell a cultural story, right? So just junk, just check, okay? Please just check. So I know this is a lot of information, and it will take time. It will take time. This is real work. And I know that many of you probably didn't anticipate that I would be giving you work, but it is absolutely worth it. It's absolutely worth it to take your time with your collection and not wait for it. Don't wait till, yeah, I'll do it like, when I'm older, I'll do it whenever. Don't wait, because we're only given today, right? Tomorrow, right? We don't know. So I know that I'm doing this with my collection right now because I have 2 small children. And I want to make sure that I pass down everything with all the stories that are attached. Because I think that's my duty. It's my duty to transfer this knowledge, to give it to my children, and to give it to people, maybe not just my children, my godchildren, the other people that are around me that I feel that would benefit from these pieces, and to tell the stories. And it's a lot of work, but it's absolutely worth it. And I know that it seems like a lot. So if you have any questions, I am available. I am absolutely available. I love talking about this stuff. I could talk about it until the cows come home. I'm super, super into this stuff. I have a Instagram page where I house a lot of my restoration work and things that I've redone for people. So I do this as a passion, and you can DM me through there. I'll give the museum the context that can be sent to you as well, and DM me, like we can totally talk if you feel like you gotten lost or you need more help. I'm absolutely available, and ready and willing to help you. So I know it's a lot, but I'm really looking forward to having our part deux of this lecture, this talk, and seeing all your heirlooms and seeing all your treasures, hearing your stories, because now I hope that you realize how perfectly named this exhibit is. As soon as we share our stories, the beads have spirit. They live. Okay. So I'm so happy to help everybody understand that, and hopefully give you more insight that beads do live as soon as you give them a spirit. And I hope that spirit lives on in many, many generations in your families. And I hope that you find many, many new treasures that you didn't know you had. And I can't wait till we see each other live and see all your treasures. So that's all I have for me. I don't know, Lily, if we're allowed to do a quick Q&A now, or what do you feel is now the protocol?
Yeah, so thank you so much, Anastasia. That was awesome. That was so touching and wonderful. Thank you. Really, that was awesome.
Sorry, I like to talk fast. So
Oh, it was great. So I think if we open up to Q&A now, that would be fantastic. I think, if we can just have a discussion. So you can type up your questions in the Q&A or in the chat. I'll watch both. I know we did get one question earlier, so maybe we'll start with that, and then that gives people a few more minutes to formulate some questions or comments. There was one question that came through, you might see there. For those who have had their families' physical heirlooms removed and destroyed, particularly in Canada during internment, what can we as students, survivors, as a community do to reconcile these truths and repair this loss, drawing on Indigenous knowledge of truth and reconciliation?
it's a very good question, because I know that many people don't have generational heirlooms, right? And this is exactly why it's important for people to realize that it doesn't have to start from many generations back. I think that there is a PhD that was just written by Cassandra Luciuk that is about internment, and I think that we can start being aware that heirlooms are an important aspect of knowledge transfer and of heritage. And I mean, I don't have a particular plan to do a said project, but I don't think that would be a very a bad one. If you're looking into internment specifically, Cassandra Luciuk, who just defended her PhD at U of T, wrote specifically about internment. So I know that there is a very large movement to do more awareness about internment, and today is the day that we recognize Canadian internment of Ukrainian Canadians. So it's right on this day. And I don't particularly have an answer to that specific question, but it's something that I think that we can explore with experts like Cassandra, and seeing how we can look at that and see if we can reconcile some of the damage that has been done to us as people. So,
okay, yeah. There's another question here. How do you invite your kids to create some of the memorable items together? How do you pick what to keep for saving years as treasures?
Right. So when we go into that, the papers that I'll send you will kind of take a look, and you'll see how it's easier to identify. If you have a story to the piece, if the piece so it's a two-part question, right? I'll deal with the question of how you select. If you have a really, really big story with this piece, right? If you wore this piece every Christmas, if you got this piece from, from a friend who came from a certain place and gave it as a gift, or if there's something that's emotionally charged about the piece, you already have potential for a story, right? That you can pass on. That's the first level, right? And then, of course, you might not think you have an artifact. That's another thing that you can go in, and it can become. I mean, cultural pieces we tend to think of have to be very old, right? But you can have a brand new gerdan that has been made for you. That's already a cultural piece, right? So you might want to take a look at if you have cultural pieces that are not necessarily very old, but that doesn't matter. You can be the first generation to pass that on. So don't overlook your contemporary collection as a source of cultural stories as well. So I think that if anything has a story, whether it's a personal story or whether it's a cultural story, you should think about that as something that you will pass on, right? In terms of inviting my children are very young. They're 7 and 8. And my daughter is more interested in beadwork, but she's not necessarily doesn't have very dexterous hands yet, but she's into it. My son is not as into it, but we'll see how that goes. So I haven't invited them really into the process yet, other than my daughter loves going through my jewelry. So that's something that she likes to do, and she likes to go through her own. And so we go and we talk about the pieces. And I actually remember my mother doing that when we were small. So I remember going through my mother's collection and her telling me about every single piece. And that aspect is very important as well. I do think that the backup of having a kind of like a collection of I want to call it like a mini catalog of your pieces is also very important, because we don't always want to tell the story at that particular time. Sometimes we don't want to, sometimes it's a painful story and we don't want to necessarily say it out loud. Maybe we're okay writing it and having it read later. For example, my mother has jewelry from from her first marriage and from her second marriage that she doesn't really want to talk about because they're emotionally charged, right? So, but she might be okay with writing it down and then having everybody sort that out later, right? So that's how I engage with my daughter right now. Maybe that will change later on, but that's how I do that right now. I don't know if that answers the question, but
I think that's pretty good. There's another question here just about coral beads in general. Just wondering, what is the source of the coral beads, the Ukrainian coral beads, and why are some red and others are coral color?
Okay, that's a good question. So this is about the species. It's a red coral. It's a precious. There's lots of coral. Precious red coral is what Ukrainians or many Slavic cultures wear, and many cultures wear precious red coral. It comes from the Mediterranean and parts of the Atlantic. Okay, so the coral that we would know from Ukraine is probably coming from the Mediterranean around Sardinia, and that was actually transferred via Italian merchants, right? And so we are all Slavic cultures love it. There's a lot of Slavic cultures that that wear different styles of coral, but it's red because it absorbs iron oxide. So as it's absorbing iron oxide, it picks up the red color, and the longer or the more I guess efficient that the coral is of absorbing that iron oxide, the redder it will become. So there's a scale of precious red coral from the very red being very, very, very sought after to a more orangey color. So there's grades like pearls, right? You have a grading system of what different colors are more sought after versus less sought after. And the reason why it's precious is because the coral is the same color all the way through. So other corals, when they blanch, right? They become, if they die, they become white. Red coral does not. Red coral has a red color all the way until its skeleton, right the way through. So you can cut a piece of coral in half and it'll be red, right? So that's considered special. No other coral does that except for angel skin coral, which is a precious pink coral, which is found in Japan, around Japan. That's precious pink coral. In the Pacific, there's precious pink coral, which is also very beautiful, but that's a different species, right? So that's how that gradient color happens, and we got it through traders, right? So it's not you don't find it in the Black Sea. He's like, oh, you find the black? No, you don't, right? And it's precious actually all the way to India, and India doesn't have it, and Japan doesn't have it, and China doesn't have it. There is some kind of, similar colors out on the Pacific, but precious red coral actually is extremely sought after in India as well for centuries and centuries. It was considered a very precious commodity. And so the Italian traders would actually trade all the way across, the Asia, Asiatic steppe and into India. And that's where a lot of the Maharajas really wanted a lot of coral as well. So kind of got sold across that band.
Wow, cool.
Yeah.
Very scientific, very interesting. Wow. Neat. Yeah, this is great. Okay, let's see what else we have here. Just a nice comment here. Anastasia, fantastic info and insight into heirlooms and cultures. Thank you, in all caps, for your explanations and examples. No, I just love folk arts, but you've given me and us so much more.
Oh, so, thank you.
That's from Maria Rupan.
Oh, yeah, thank you. For those who don't know, Maria Rupan is a Gardan expert, so she does woven beadwork, beautiful woven beadwork. So thank you so much, Maria. Thank you.
Okay, well, I think that's it. If anyone has any more questions. Oh, Mariana says, I concur with this last comment from Maria. Thank you so much. I great. Also concur. Thank you.
Awesome. If I will send all the documents too. So like I will send that to Lily and to the museum, and so that can be transferred to everybody as well. So there will be kind of like a package, I think, that will be sent to all the participants at the end, and I'll keep my contact information and my Instagram information there as well. If you like looking at fun stuff and things that have been restored and restrung, because I do restoration and restringing. So like restoration is when you actually try to make it exactly as it was, and try to keep as many original parts as possible. And then you can do restringing, which is a different process, but but I do that work, and you can see some of it on my Instagram page. That's not necessarily Anastasia Baczynskyj, but there's my Kola Slavic heirloom page that has a lot of fun pictures to look at too, and lots of little fun infographics that you can take a look at as well.
Yeah, I highly recommend. Maybe Anastasia, if you don't mind, maybe you can drop the the name of your Instagram page into the chat, and then people will have it. There's another question here, which is about if the recording will be available after, and the answer is yes, we will make it available. We have put all of our lecture series for this exhibit on YouTube, so we will be able to do that for this lecture as well. It will probably be, bear with us, give us a little time to do the editing and stuff, but it will eventually be available, yes. Okay, so I think we'll wrap up the Q&A then. Again, thank you so much, Anastasia. Thank you everyone for your questions, for your contributions. We really appreciate it. Before we conclude for the evening, I would just like to take an opportunity to just say a big thank you to our sponsors as well, without whose continued support this exhibit and the programming around this exhibit would have never come to fruition. So I'd just like to take this opportunity to thank the Seuss Foundation of Canada, BCU Foundation, Government of Canada, Culture, History and Sport through Young Canada Works, Building Careers in Heritage and Young Canada Works in Heritage Organizations, Employment and Social Development through Canada Summer Jobs, Government of Ontario 2020 Experience Program, Wally Wishnowski, and the Olzich Foundation. If you enjoyed this event tonight, please do consider making a donation or becoming a member of our museum. We are a small, mostly volunteer-run museum, and it's only through your generosity that we're able to host this kind of content. So if you are able to make a donation, please do visit the donation page on our website. Every donation really helps us immensely in achieving our goals to create this kind of programming that's engaging for this exhibit and also for many more in the future. So additionally, at no cost, I recommend that you like our Facebook or Instagram page and subscribe to our mailing list as well on email. Our current exhibit, The Spirit of Beads, Sharing Our Stories, closes this Saturday. So we do actually still have some slots available for in-person visits before the end of the week. So if you're local to Toronto, or if you're close-ish to Toronto and want to make a trip in, please do visit our website, www.umcontario.com. And you can follow the link on our website to the Eventbrite page to book your ticket. So we really hope we'll be able to see some of you in the museum before this exhibit closes on Saturday. Thank you so much, everyone, again, for your support in attending this event. Thank you, Anastasia. And I wish everyone a wonderful evening. Thank you.
Thank you so much, everyone. Have a lovely, lovely evening.